The Sandy and Toddcast is a Mind Garden Media podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions. It's another episode of the Sandy and Toddcast. And Sandy, I'll tell you what, this one is kind of weird because we had it planned and then something happened that we're going to be able to talk about in the podcast.
Todd, it was so crazy. And it didn't dawn on me until just about an hour ago, the connection between the two. Really, really strange. This week, we're going to a twisted place. The Old Main, or the Old Utica Psychiatric Hospital in Utica, New York, and we're going to talk all about it.
It is on the way next. Season 2, Episode 10 of the Sandy and Toddcast is next.
What, you beautiful souls. I'm so excited to have this platform where I can share my gifts, the things that I do, what we need to do as a collective energy to really step into soul's path. Reiki and healing and alignment. Oh my goodness, these are all so very important in what we do. I have a daily podcast that I do. You can find me on Spotify and Anchor for your daily vibes, your energies as a collective unit, right? You can also find me on my Facebook page where I really go more in depth with it, but you can find me at Mystic Karma by Victoria.
Broadcasting from two very different yet magical places not found on any map. Get ready to discuss the strange, weird, ghostly, crazy, spooky, and odd things that take place around us each and every day, all while having a little bit of fun. This is the Sandy and Toddcast.
It's another audio cast, the Sandy and Toddcast. This is Season 2, Episode 10 already. Twisted Places, Old Main.
Oh, Todd. I love this one because the Old Main, or the Utica Psychiatric Hospital, it's had a few names. Utica Insane Asylum was built many, many years ago in the 1800s, the mid-1800s, and it's been a facet of my community for that long. Storied history, lots of stuff to talk about on this podcast episode about the Old Main. It's also had some ghost stories attached to it as well.
I would guess that it would. I mean, whenever you talk about a place like that, you would think that there's got to be some energies left behind.
Yeah, well, I've been in there, and I can attest to the fact that there's plenty of energies left behind in there. And it's when you have that much emotion and that much, I guess, pain, anguish, happiness too. There was a lot of happiness in certain points of the Old Main's history, and just so many stories that come from it. You can't help but know that there's lots of energy attached to the land, to the building itself. There's some intelligent spirits there, and there's also a lot of residual energy at the Utica Old Main.
You also have to take into consideration when you talk about these buildings, these things had to be built. It's not like today where it's all fabricated, brought on site, and boom, they're up. You're talking about painstakingly building these walls, which were feet thick, not inches thick, but feet thick.
Right.
Hand-carved doors and all that kind of stuff. All that energy goes into the buildings themselves before the first person steps foot in there in an insane asylum or whatever you want to call it. So,
and this structure is just massive, and we'll go into its size in the episode, but it is truly a massive undertaking to build something like this. Imagine building something that big in the 1800s. And it was the only one of its kind in New York State at the time.
Right.
You had people from all walks of life, all different illnesses. If you were just in a bad mood and your family didn't want to deal with you, they'd send you there. If you had PMS, they'd send you there.
I wish my family would send me there because I'm in a bad mood plenty of times. Well, and here's the other ironic part about it is we knew we were getting together to put this thing together for the audio cast today. And then,
right,
boom, as a way to kind of put a punctuation on it, Mother Nature does her best to mess things up there.
Today was an interesting day, I've got to tell you. So here's what happened. I live literally less than a 5-minute drive from the Old Main. I am in a town called New Hartford, and the Old Main is in Utica. We are sort of a suburb of the city of Utica, and we got really bad storms rolling through this afternoon. So bad that we got it badly. I have trees around me, wooded area, and the trees were pretty bad. We got some branches down in my backyard, and we had pebble-sized hail coming down. But literally 5 minutes away from us, I believe they think there was a microburst that occurred. Now, a microburst is not a tornado. It's sort of like a sudden downdraft of huge, heavy, lots of winds. And what they can do is they can down trees. They can essentially have the same effect as a tornado. But where a tornado rotates, a downdraft is sort of like just straight down. And I lived through one before. Luckily, I didn't have to live through one today. That's what I'm guessing happened because the damage that was done in the western part of Utica was pretty bad. A tree actually fell on someone's house, and a man in a wheelchair was trapped in his house with his dog. They had to, the fire department actually had to come and rescue them both from the house. They're okay, but that was really scary, and that wasn't that far from the Old Main. And the Old Main campus has trees down everywhere. I haven't heard if there's structural damage to the Old Main, but that thing is pretty solid even today. So yeah. I'm assuming there wasn't any real structural damage done to the actual building, but trees all around the Old Main campus. I saw some pictures. It's pretty scary.
You sent me some video. Where'd you get the video from?
One of the people who's a friend of mine on Facebook actually took it. I think he works for the city, like the DPW type thing. And he took some pictures this afternoon in the aftermath of that storm right on the Old Main campus.
Well, listen, it's kind of interesting that we had this wild storm today, and now we've got a wild story to pass along. This is Season 2, Episode 10 of the Sandy and Toddcast, Twisted Places, Old Main.
Tonight is Twisted Tuesday. We decided to bring the Twisted Tuesday back because a couple of weeks ago, Dennis Webster was on our Sunday Fun Day. That was an amazing interview. We want to get Dennis back. He'll be back with us. And because Dennis and I and Dave are the Fort Schuyler Paranormal Society, do investigations together. So I'm going to have Dennis come back every once in a while to talk about some of the investigations that we do. So we sort of took our inspiration from Dennis and decided that we wanted to do a Twisted Tuesday on the Old Main. And it's quite an amazing place. So Todd, do you want to play the audio first and then we can get into the actual story?
Yeah, so this is the audio from the interview we did with Dennis a couple of weeks back, and I think Sandy right off the bat says, you know, what's kind of like your favorite book? What's your favorite one that you've worked on? And this was his response.
Definitely the Old Main book, and I'll tell you why. Because my mother was worked in the psychiatric industry as a nurse, and my mom's passed away, but she was a wonderful soul and a sweet human being, and she dedicated her life to helping people with mental illness. And I was just fascinated by that place. It's incredible. It was the first of its kind in the United States in that it opened in 1843 that used what was called moral treatment. So that I'm just fascinated by that because up to that point, it was all about lunacy, like you were cursed by the moon or you're possessed by the devil. It was the first time they called it the cult of curability, where science started coming into, analysis and things like phrenology. I can't even say that word, but the areas of the brain that at the time they thought had different emotions.
Right.
Well, probably that book, only because of my mother.
I actually had an experience in there. I've told you about that. It's always been shrouded in such mystery. From the time I was a child, I'd see it. You can see it from Route 12 from the arterial. You could always see it up on like the little hill, and just a gorgeous, huge, hulking piece of architecture. And we finally got in there one time. They were giving tours of just certain areas, but it's always been shrouded in kind of mystery and stories. The Utica crib was invented there. There are stories of chains and shackles in the basement. I've never been in the basement. I don't know what goes on down there. There's tunnels. It's a whole campus, really. And did you find anything out while writing that book that sort of surprised you?
Yes, I would say absolutely the big surprise to me, because I read back then all the journals and things at the time, and it's easy for us in our modern day and age to say things like the Utica crib is a medieval torture device. And can you believe they put people in that? And wow, I can't believe they lobotomized people and they gave them shock treatment. Well, when you read at the time, they were trying to put their best. That was the best that they knew at the time to help people. They wanted to help people. So they didn't just say, I'm going to torture your ass and throw you in this Utica crib.
Right.
No,
right.
Science advances. Like, think about it now. 100 years from now, will they look back and say, can you believe that they used to give people that had cancer radiation? They radiated them. Or some of the things we do now. We're so smart, but we're really not.
They did the best they could with what they had.
Yeah, Dr. Brigham was an amazing man.
Yeah.
There you go. Dennis and his thought process on why the Old Main book was his favorite. I have not read the book, I have to be honest with you, and I can't wait to read
It's
the book.
fantastic. I'm going to send you a copy.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I'm going to send you a copy. It's really, really, really good. As a matter of fact, I was just trying to find my copy. I don't know what I did with it, but I do have it somewhere in the house. And it's an excellent, excellent read. It'll keep you busy. It's really, really good. That's a picture of the Utica crib. We'll talk about the Utica crib in a sec, but that thing was very controversial in the time, believe it or not. They actually thought that was barbaric. That was barbaric, as opposed to the chains and, the shackles that they would use, which kind of surprised me a little bit, but they did. There were a lot of people who just did not agree with that idea, with Dr. Brigham's Utica crib, and eventually it was taken away. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Let's just talk about the building first. Now, like I said in the interview with Dennis, you can see it. There's a road that heads from Utica all the way up north. It's Route 12, and as you come over that sort of semi-highway looking place, you can see it up on the hill. And I remember being a child, like little, and riding in the car with my grandmother and looking up at this beautiful piece of architecture on the hill. And it's been shrouded in such mystery for so many years. It's amazing. It had a few different names over the years. It was the New York State Lunatic Asylum at Utica, the Utica Psychiatric Center, and the Utica State Hospital. And there may have been one more, but I couldn't find it offhand. But those were the three main names that it went by over the years. It opened in January of 1843, which was very early. I would love to, Todd, someday talk about, I went to our county history center a handful of years ago, and there was a man who wrote a lot of books about sanitariums and asylums throughout New York State, and he did one talk on some of the asylums down in New York City back in the 1700s, and it was fascinating. So I think I might like to either try to get him on or maybe ourselves talk about it, because it was just an amazing, amazing story.
What I think is kind of interesting is if you look at, the really old photos of it there, it looks massive there, but then you see what was added onto it over the years. Those big, huge wings off on the side.
Originally, it was supposed to be 4 buildings. So it was supposed to be the main building there, then the 2 that came off, like you see, and then one going across. And there was supposed to be a courtyard in the middle, but they ran out of funding. And I don't quote me, but I want to say it cost about $100,000 to build that in the 1800s. Yeah, it's unbelievable. And let's just talk a little bit about the architecture first. It's Greek Revival, and it was designed by a man named Captain William Clark. Its construction was funded by the state and Utica residents actually contributed to the funds to have this hospital built. Like I said, it was originally supposed to be 4 different buildings, but now it's a complete campus. They were never able to quite finish the main building. It started right there. You see where the Greek columns are. That was the main one.
Yeah.
It was 50 feet high, 550 feet long, and 50 feet deep. And it has the 6 massive Greek-style columns. Those are 48 feet tall and 8 feet in diameter. So I've actually been on those steps, and when you see those columns up close, it's massive. It's absolutely massive to see them.
It almost looks like there might be a little man standing there if you look really closely on the steps.
Yes, I think so. And this hospital actually was open until the 1970s. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, it was open until the 1977. The last patients were transferred to other care facilities, and the hospital was closed. So that's quite a track record.
Absolutely. It almost looks too, and because I'm into architecture and stuff, if you look at the very ends of those wings, it looks like there was some sort of structure off there that's no longer there now.
Well, there are more buildings. They're a little bit newer buildings, but they're still old on that campus. And there's the Center for Missing and Exploited Children has offices on the campus. There's some other buildings along there. Some of them are falling apart. Some are actually still being used. The Utica Hospital itself, Old Main itself, is being used to house New York State medical records, I think it is.
So they're still using the building?
They're using it just as almost like a vault to keep the records. Nobody really goes in there, does anything in there per se, but they are using it. It was, let me see if I can, I know I'm skipping ahead, but I want you guys to understand that. Yes, it was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1989, and I think the Landmark Society of Utica is the group that has been trying to restore it. They're the ones that very rarely do help to facilitate tours in there. Now, you can't really tour much of it. You can tour the main section and one of the wings. They've started to restore one of the wings. And I'll tell you guys all about the tour, because not many people really have had a chance to be in there. I was very fortunate. When we got there, the line was literally the entire length of that driveway out to the street and wrapped around down the street. That's how many people were waiting in line to get in there. It was crazy. I mean, that's how popular this building is. If you're lucky enough to get in there, definitely take the tour. So let's just go back a little bit. Now, opened in 1843, the wings on either side of the main section were added in 1846 and 1850 because they were just taking on more and more patients. And I thought this was interesting. And this is a quote. The accommodations were listed as 380 single rooms for patients, 24 for their attendants, 20 dormitories each, accommodating 5 to 12 persons, so shared rooms, 16 parlors or day rooms, 12 dining rooms, 24 bathing rooms, 24 closets, and 24 water closets or bathrooms. So
now, was that the main building
that
itself?
Was the main building itself. And that's how quickly that ran out that, 4 years later, they had to start adding the wings.
But of course, remember in those days, it didn't take much to get thrown into one of those
No,
places.
not at all.
So, if you were even simply as somewhat crazy as my co-host, they would drag your ass away and lock you up. I mean,
it's true. We joke about it, but people suffering from mild depression.
Right.
You joke about it. You write down, every month you write down on the calendar when I'm due, but women with PMS actually were thrown into insane asylums because they were thought to be insane because they had PMS. It was a totally different time. It was a time where there wasn't as much knowledge as we have today. And so Dennis was right. They really did do the best that they could with what they were given, with what they understood. We can look back on it now and say, oh my God, it was so inhumane and it was so barbaric. But then they were actually doing the best things that they could for their patients. And Dr. Brigham, his name was, I love his name, Amariah Brigham. He was the hospital's first director. And the hospital itself was a prototype in the country's efforts to provide mental health care in an institutional setting. So it was one of the very, very first in the country. And again, while their methods may seem cruel today, they were really trying to do the best that they could for their patients, especially Dr. Brigham. He really believed that putting patients to work and keeping them busy was really essential to helping to treat their mental illness. So there was gardening, there were crafts, needlework, carpentry. They even had a yearly fair where the residents could sell their crafts and people would buy them. The first one that they ever had raised over $244, which back in the 1840s was quite a bit of money. It helped them to build a library and do some other stuff as well. They also had a newspaper. It was called the Opal, and the residents ran the newspaper. It had stories and puzzles and all kinds of things back then for the residents themselves. So Dr. Brigham really believed that if you teach people a craft, if you teach them to stay busy, that it will help them mentally, which really, if you think about it, what do the experts tell us today? Go outside, get fresh air, get exercise. It'll help you feel better. So he was really a man that was, pretty ahead of his time in his thinking. And so that's when the Utica crib was really born. During the 1800s, they mostly used chains and shackles. And there are stories that in the basement, in the tunnels downstairs, there are still shackles and chains attached to the walls. Of course, nobody gets to go down there, so we don't know if that's true or not, but I would assume that there are probably still those round things that are stuck in the wall that they would attach the chains to.
Yeah, they're called round things stuck in the wall.
Exactly.
They're like metal cups kind of thing.
Yes. And I would assume that they're probably still down there. It wouldn't surprise me. So the Utica crib was very, very interesting. Dr. Brigham did not like the idea of shackles and chains because for the 1840s, he thought that was barbaric. And I have to say, I agree with him. Nobody wants to be chained to a wall. So he took a bed, a normal bed, and he built slats on the sides of it. And then he had a top with slats. It was hinged, and they would bring it down and they would lock it. And it was to help control unruly, out of control patients who were having problems. Thank you. Anchors. And, and some of them would be kept in there for days. And that's where I think part of the controversy came in, that they would be kept in there for days. But the patients themselves, actually, the ones that were lucid and some of them actually welcomed it because it gave them the freedom that shackles and chains wouldn't give them. They couldn't move around a lot, but they still felt comforted by being inside this crib. So I don't know. I would say for the time, I kind of am in line with his thinking that he was actually trying to help them.
Yeah, probably for days on end, probably not a good thing.
Because I can't imagine, if there was someone who was that out of control for days on end, there would have been other things that they would most likely, hopefully try or do for them. We don't want situations where people are just laying there and not getting help. But I think as a way to help control them, I think it was probably a good idea at the time. But by 1887, all of the Utica cribs were removed from the asylum. So, cool. They had moved on, I think, far enough where they had found new methods for treating them. Dr. Brigham, I would say Dr. Brigham was a pretty cool guy. He really looked at the humanity instead of just counting them as numbers, the patients as numbers, and he really looked at how humanely they should be treated. Maybe it wasn't all correct, but again, for that time, like Dennis made a great point. We shoot people with radiation who have cancer, but who's going to look, 100 years from now and say, what is wrong with those people? They shot radiation into other people. Science evolves. So they did the best with what they had at the time.
Feeling a bit lost? Not sure what's holding you back? A transformational tarot session with Eclectic Path Wellness can provide the guidance you need, combining tarot and coaching to help you understand and navigate the changes you may face. Heal, empower, and clarify your path. Connect with us on Facebook at Eclectic Path Wellness.
I want to share a couple of photos that I think are just flippin' stunning. I love architecture and I love history of old buildings and stuff like that. And we've seen the outside of this facility, but some of the pictures on the inside are absolutely unbelievable. Now, obviously, that's seen better days, but that's a gorgeous photo.
Now, those that's in one of the wings, and they are trying to restore as much as they can. It's mostly the center part that they've been working on. It's a very slow process. It's a lot like the Rucker Mansion in Utica. It's such a slow process, but they are working on it. Now, those rooms were individual patient rooms. I actually stood inside some. They were actually, believe it or not, they were fairly roomy considering what you're talking about here. They were pretty roomy, and they're tall. They're extremely tall rooms. The doors are very.
You can tell just by looking at this too. I mean, you can see how high the ceilings are in these. This looks like some sort of parlor or something like that.
That was the room. I believe that was the room where I had my experience in, and I'll tell you guys about that in just a few minutes too. But and that's a great picture because that just shows you how immense these wings are, and that's just one floor. That's one wing, one floor.
Right. And
you see how tall the doors are? I mean, they did believe in letting in a lot of light. And, as much as they could for the time. And they kept, I believe I heard the guides say that they did keep the doors open whenever possible. So it really was not the horrible House of Horrors for the most part that you would think.
Now, this obviously looks like a little bit more of an updated photo. It's a little grainy, so it's hard to tell. Is that part of the area that's been upgraded?
Yes, I think it is. It's one of the wings. We were allowed, when we took the tour, like I said, there were hundreds and hundreds of people standing in line for this tour. It was probably, I would say maybe 2010. And all I ever wanted to do since I was a child was get inside that building. Now I kind of understand why I did. But at the time, I didn't know why. I just was fixated on getting inside the building. So I didn't care how long I had to stand. We got there like 2 hours early, and we were still about 300 people back. And when you're standing there, when you're standing in front of it, and you're looking at it, I cannot describe to you how imposing it is. It's absolutely gorgeous. And it's such a shame that for the longest time it was allowed to fall into ruin the way it was. And I have to say the Landmark Society of Utica, if you can support them, they do amazing, amazing work. And they're just wonderful, wonderful people. And they've been really trying hard to restore it, at least somewhat, to its glory.
I think a lot of historic buildings in any shape, in any, I guess, realm, whether it's, things like this where it's a mental health institute or an old hospital or, old courthouses, all that kind of stuff, they go out of favor because they're not as fancy, heating and cooling and blah, blah, blah. And so a lot of them go away. And so if you have the opportunity to save some of these buildings and talk about the history of them. I think that's very, very important. We're actually discussing the book Old Main, New York State Lunatic Asylum at Utica, New York, from Dennis Webster, one of our previous guests on the show. And we're getting kind of an inside look at the actual Old Main building.
Just
facility.
An absolute gorgeous building. And so when you first walk in those big doors, there's sort of like a big, like a main room. And then immediately to the right is one wing. Immediately, then you go down a little bit and then the other wing. And we started out our tour going down the wing that wasn't quite as restored yet. So the first picture you showed of the wing was more of what we saw. And it was just astonishing how big it is. And there are some parts of the building, unfortunately, that are dangerous. So you can't go in there. But we were fortunate to be able to go down the wings. And I actually, believe it or not, and not knowing about being an empath and about abilities in 2010, I actually felt fine in this area. And I think that's a testament to, looking back on it, to the treatment in there. I think the fact that they did try to involve their patients in everyday normal things, and they did try to treat them humanely, actually was a very good, left good energy in those sections of the building.
I want to point out how thick those walls are. And you can tell by the door frames, how wide that box area that you're seeing there with the 3 or 4 boxes high, that's how thick the walls were in this. So they're probably, I'm going to guess just by looking at it, like maybe 2 feet.
At least. And that's all concrete. Yeah. Those were all concrete. That section. That was all concrete. So it's just imposing, but it's not negative. I didn't feel any negativity in that section, which is fantastic to me.
What about sadness? Because there's a difference between negativity and sadness.
I felt fine. I didn't feel anything. Now I can look back and be like, here's what I felt and here's what I didn't feel and this is why. And I just never came away with any. I was actually fine. Just being a normal, tour person throughout that wing. Right. I didn't have any issues. I didn't know. Now, by that time, I had already had the experience in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And that was extremely disturbing for me.
We'll have to do that in another
We'll talk about that in a different thing. That was very disturbing for me. I didn't understand it at the time. Looking back at these 2 incidents that happened about a year or 2 apart, it makes a lot of sense. Walking down that hallway was just fine. There was no sadness. There was nothing. However, we got back out of the wing, and that yellow room that you put up, I believe that was the one. I said, "Oh, Dave, what's going on in here?" And we walked into the room, and as soon as I walked over the threshold, I felt like I got punched in the chest. And I started to feel like it was very hard to breathe. And when you looked around the room, there were all these paintings in the room. And I walked through about halfway, and I looked at the paintings, and I looked at Dave, and I said, "Dave, please get me out of here." And he looked at me like he didn't understand what I said, "Please get me out of here now." So he took my hand and he led me out. And as soon as we got out, I started to feel better. Now, what I did find out after the fact was that those were paintings done by actual patients before the hospital was closed in the 70s. They still had paintings from patients, and they were on display in there. I must have been picking up, I look at it now, and I must have picked up on all of their emotions as soon as I walked into that room. Sadness, anger, And that, to me, that must have been what that pressure was on my chest. It's like all of those emotions coming at me at once.
Sure.
And especially for someone who wasn't expecting that. Now I can walk into a room and sort of be, I guess, prepared. But back then I couldn't. And it was a really moving experience for me. That's when I started to think maybe there's something weird going on, but I didn't know enough about it to actually say, oh, that's what it is. I just couldn't figure out why it happened. But it was very, very scary to me. And as soon as I walked out, I was okay. But they had some beautiful furniture in the main section, and they were doing such a good job with it that I was just
that room itself,
gorgeous.
I mean, wow,
and
beautiful.
My
job
assumption is that is probably maybe one of the top administrators' offices. You see the bookshelves. It could have been the library. It also could have been the library. But my thought is it was probably maybe an administrator kind of high up. Because that's a beautiful, beautiful space. Absolutely gorgeous. So
I love architecture so much. These are the kinds of photos I would have on
I love
my
that
walls.
picture. That's one of my favorite pictures of there.
The colors and that color paint and all that is just, for me, that's spot on for stuff
It just
that I like.
shows you, it's a picture of life at that. It's just it's a picture in time. And it's just fascinating.
It's a freeze frame is basically what it is. And I look at architecture like that. If you can look at a piece of architecture and you can get it back to how it was, you peel back the layers of stuff that people did to it over the years, and you find it in its very first form. It tells you so much about what went on there, what life was like. And you buy an old house now and you find, holes in the floor in your kitchen and you realize, well, the sink was over there. Or you find something in the floor in your living room and you say, well, there was double doors here at one time, That's the kind of stuff that really interests me. And so, I mean, these pictures are just amazing.
Just gorgeous. It's beautiful. One of my favorite things to do in the summertime is just to look at Dave and say, hey, let's jump in the car and let's drive down Genesee Street. Now, Genesee Street is like our main thoroughfare in the city. It connects all, south, where I live in New Hartford. It connects it to, North Utica and north of Utica. And, it's the, quote, bustling part of the city. And there are a lot of homes, beautiful homes, like huge, huge homes that I'll say, oh my gosh, I'd probably drive him crazy. Dave, can you imagine what that looked like back in the early 1900s or the 1800s? And
right.
Dave, can you imagine if they had to heat that house with the way we do it today, how much that would cost them? And that was one family, and now it's 5 units. And
so does Dave ever go, woman, shut your mouth? Does he ever say that to you?
No, because he likes doing it too. He likes doing it too.
Okay, just
no, he doesn't tell me to shut my mouth. No, he likes it too. But yeah, it's history is. I mean, I make him drive through the cemetery all the time. I love the cemetery. I love history. There's so much history in the cemetery. And, as long as I talk to the dead people and tell them I'm not there to harm them or cause them any harm, I don't have any problems in the cemetery. I don't pick up much in the cemeteries, but I love them. I love the history.
Anything else you want to mention about Old Main at all?
Just that it's such a beautiful piece of history. And I really recommend Dennis's book because he takes every piece of history and makes it something that isn't boring. He makes it something, because a lot of people think history is boring. It's not. It's fascinating. We learn from history. And Dennis, you can find this book on Amazon. If you're local to me in Central New York, you can find it at most of the historical societies in Central New York. And just check it out online on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I know he said that. And read the book. It's fascinating. It's so fascinating. And he writes it in a way that is easy to follow, easy to understand, and will just make you feel for the way things were back in those days.
Very good. Before we wrap things up, there's been a guy that I've been trying to get on the podcast for quite some time who is somebody that was on the latest version of Ghost Hunters a couple of years ago. His name is Brandon Elvis. And not Elvis, but Elvis. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because one of the things that we feel really strong about is when you investigate, when you're getting into this and you're talking about these things and you're walking through these buildings and whatever you're doing, there's got to be a sense of respect. And I'm guilty. There are a couple shows that are really about paranormal and fun. And I like having a good time at an investigation as well. But he had a couple of posts on Twitter, and I just want to quickly read them because I think it kind of sums up how we kind of feel about things. And what he said was, belief in the paranormal goes way beyond spirit boxes, LSS cameras, and television. Throughout history, societies have lived their life on the prospect of an afterlife. Trying to make yourself known by posting videos online of these methods won't change anything. Life, culture, and respect should be key in all research. There's no reason to spin or sensationalize the stories of those that came and died before us. These were people. They had families and lives. Never forget that. And again, sometimes you can get caught up in the moment when something happens that you weren't expecting, and you may react a certain way that you wish you wouldn't have. There is a rush that comes from being at an investigation. Sometimes it's the energy in the room. Sometimes it's the energy of the group you're with. Sometimes it's just the excitement of, again, being able to do this and being able to go out and visit these places. But you have to walk away from each situation and realize you are probably communicating with someone's mother, someone's father, daughter, sister. It doesn't matter. These were, unless you're talking about something that was not human, then that's something else. But these were actual people, and their energy is still human energy. So, just that respect is really, really important. And that's why in this group, and I give Sandy a lot of hell. I understand that. I give Drew a lot of hell. It's really out of love. And we do give each other hell back and forth. But this podcast, this whole community is really about having respect for one another. And there's no reason on this podcast ever, if you tell us, share your story, to say, you're going to think I'm crazy, but we should have t-shirts made with that on.
We should.
You're going to think I'm crazy, but fill in the blank. I can guarantee you everybody here who's had an experience, when they tell their stories, the first thing they say is, you're going to think I'm crazy, but boom, we don't think you're crazy. Okay. We might try and point out some other things that you may have experienced that were something else, but we're here to listen. We're here to learn. We're here to nurture each other to continue to grow and do these things. So I just wanted to point that out. I just thought it was so poignant that he posted that. And I've been begging him, please come on the show and talk about that. And he's also very specific about certain equipment. And I would like to talk more about that on the show too. And
hopefully
get him on,
we can get him on. And I think the way what you said was beautiful, and it was very true. I look at...
Well, of course, because I speak so well, just like I'm from the UK.
Well, you speak from the heart, and that's what it's all about. And I
speak from the loins.
I kind of see paranormal investigation. There are two main types of people. There are the people who are going there because it's fun, and it's, my hobby. And then there are people who really, truly want to help others. They truly want to try to understand. Maybe they're people like myself who can feel something extra.
Might be trying to figure out a little bit about themselves by going
Exactly.
to these places,
I have learned so much about myself, Todd. I have learned so much about myself, and I'm still learning. And yes, in the heat of the moment, I'll tell you what, it's exciting when something happens and you get excited because that's validation. And it's exciting. But these are people that once existed. And these are people with thoughts and feelings. I had a conversation with a woman and I felt her guilt. She's gone. She's gone from this earth. And I felt her guilt from the afterlife and her sorrow from the afterlife. That's an incredible thing. And we need to treat that with respect. And so this is what we're about. We respect you and we respect your stories, and we just want to help you be able to tell your story, and you're not crazy.
There you go, your Twisted Places Old Main, the Sandy and Toddcast audio cast on this Sunday.
One of my favorites, I love this one because the Old Main has always been a fascination of mine, and obviously you can see why. It's so historic, and it's got controversy, and it's got negativity, and it's got positivity all together in one story, in one place, and quite a place at that.
You know, it's one of those things too, and I know you had mentioned before that you went there years ago to kind of tour it and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
When you've got a structure like that, that's that imposing on a community, and it has all those stories and those tales behind it, and then you've got some interest in it on a personal level, you know, the thing you want to do is you want to go and experience it. And sometimes you do get a chance to experience, and it's kind of a downer. You know, it's not what you thought it was going to be. It's, you know, whatever. And in this case, I think you walked away from the situation feeling just as fulfilled as you wanted to be fulfilled in experiencing it.
And not even expecting it.
Right.
That's the funniest part of the whole thing was I was just thrilled to get inside of there. I remember my grandmother, when I was little, my grandmother would drive. We have they call it the arterial. It's 12 north and south. And as you drive on it, you'd look over to the right, and the Old Main, you could see it sort of on a hill from the car. And I can't tell you the number of times, Todd, that I would look and see the Old Main, and it's so imposing and so large. And I'd ask her all the time, Grandma, tell me, do you know anything about that? And she didn't really know too much about it, hence, you know, feeding my need to find out more about it. But it was always shrouded in mystery for everybody. And to be able to get in there just in and of itself was great. Then to get in there, not expecting to experience the things that I experienced in there, that really, you know, it's one of those places that I would love to get back in there on my own and investigate. But if I never go back in again, I was just happy to be in there and to see it for what it really was and to experience what I experienced.
I want to give your house a nickname. I want to call it the Utica Crib. That's what I want to call your house now. Where are you going, Sandy? Oh, you know, we're going to go hang out at the crib, the Utica Crib.
The crib. Those things, you know, it's funny about that, Todd. Those things were so cool. And in a way, they were more humane than some of the other treatments, but they were also a little scary too, and a little on the edge of okay, not okay, you know, but at the time they were doing the best they could with what they had. You know, we look back and say all this stuff was so inhumane, but really for them, they were advances. They were advances in medicine and treatment. And so, you know, you can't say they were inhumane in the true sense that they did this stuff to hurt people. Right. They were trying. They did what they could.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can check out the actual video cast of this. That is available on our Facebook page. You can also check out the interview we did on our Facebook page with Dennis Webster and his book, Old Main, New York State Lunatic Asylum. He talks about that in the podcast. And you can pick up his book, Dennis Webster, Old Main, New York State Lunatic Asylum at Utica, New York. It's a cool book. I keep it right here in the studio with me.
And Dennis also has a new book coming out in September that I just want to mention because I love Dennis and he's such a talented author. It's called Haunted Adirondacks. And the thing that I love the most about Dennis is he actually goes into these places, experiences them, does ghost hunting in there, which I just love that. He's not taking just stories and witness accounts. He's actually going in there himself. So Dennis Webster, Haunted Adirondacks. We'll have him back on the show very soon to talk about it. September, that new book will be out.
We're in the process of booking a bunch of great guests. Can't wait to tell you about them. Can't tell you about them yet, but we will soon. Keep tuned in to our Facebook page. Also, our group on Facebook, Stay Weirdos, the fans of the Sandy and Toddcast. Is that right?
Well, you know, that wasn't bad. It's the friends of the Sandy and Toddcast. Why don't you write it down, Todd? Anyways, a big thanks to Dan Phillips for loaning us his wonderful song, 600 Miles, for our outro.
Got to tell you a quick story about that.
Yeah.
Because our friend Lisa Hale was listening to a Spotify playlist, and she's listening to it, and she's like, well, how do I know that song that came up? It turns out it is 600 Miles. So that was kind of cool. Yeah.
There you go. I love Dan, and I love his music. And we're going to get him on, I think, for Halloween, because Dan has an alter ego, Danny Stitches, and I'd love to have him come on. He does a lot of Halloween-themed stuff, so looking forward to that for October. And make sure that you do the thing and spread the love, and SHARE all of our video casts, all of our audio casts. Give us a review. Please give us a review. That's the only way new people will learn about us, or a big way that new people will learn about us. And we couldn't thank you enough for all your support.
All right. Till we do this all again, which will be very, very soon. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.